Okay, my training, actually, I started when I was 14, which is fairly late in a sort of dance world. Not so late for contemporary dance, but still, I walked into it in a very copying kind of learning, not quite sure, not really interested in technique, and technique wasn't my way in. My way in was enjoying just movement and enjoying coordination. And when I got into dance school and I met choreographers like Hoffer Schechter, the idea of technique just suddenly turned into articulation. Your ability to be as intelligent in your whole body as you are in your hands. You have that intelligence just because you use them all the time. But it's a real, almost an imaginative process of just copy-pasting that feeling. And that makes, for me, dance a much more imaginative process, which feeds really beautifully into Gecko, who if it doesn't say exactly what it has to say narratively, it's completely useless. So there's no real technique, apart from how ready can you be to change shape and shape shift. So I think my training in terms of having a quite improvisational attitude to movement is really, really helpful. And I think in terms of the only thing I had in the theatre world was a curiosity, really. I didn't have any training in theatre. I had a real curiosity for it. And I think it's because I wasn't too bogged down with feeling like I was a dancer. So I had no training in it, and in that sense I was completely unprepared, and it didn't prepare me for this job. But thankfully this job gives you that sense of equality, where once you're in the room, you're just a performer, you're not a dancer. And so there was this very quiet sense of just starting off by blagging it, starting off by really just going with these techniques about breathing and trying to be as open as you can, and always constantly feeling like you're lagging and you're not doing it well enough. But just picking it up the same way I did at the very beginning of dance. And I feel personally that the principles are very, very similar. The universal principles are similar. And that's what makes it so effective in Gecko, because I think Gecko believes that's true as well. We have a seed idea, which is not much, to be honest. It's something like, one day could be an office scenario where you're busy, but there's a sense of fear. So there's like an action, there's something to do, and then there's like a roof over it. And the roof over it, the emotional content of it, gives you a little bit of information about your breath and about how you engage it. And then the office stuff is your ability just to play with as much finesse as you can. And what I love about it is that it's so completely open, and the brushstroke is really, really broad, that you're allowed to make decisions and accept them and keep them and move on, where normally you would squash it straight away and go like, oh, it's rubbish. And that's what's brilliant about a meet. In terms of getting in the room, it's about making. It's about having ammunition. Because once you've got ammunition, you become a much more intelligent editor, and you go like, oh, I can chuck that whole day's work away, because now I know that compared to that's brilliant. But if you try and be an editor while you're making, you spend a whole day on 8 counts, and it's overthought, and you show it to someone, and they're like, oh, that's cool. You're like, it's really a waste of time, and it's a bit of a constipated process. So that's what's great in the room. You can be really generous, and you can churn, and then you can edit honestly and quite open-heartedly as well. That feeds into the process, because the next day you come in, you work on something else, but immediately you've embedded something, so you're not, even your exact repetition of what you've just done is more detailed or a bit more confident. And then you have a huge kind of enlightened moment where you go, got it. And that might mean you only keep 10% of what you did, but now you're working with such a good momentum that you slowly start to build things. And that all that work might just be a scene. And you do that again, and you do that again, and suddenly that scene and that detail connects to maybe that transition. That gives you an idea about a piece of furniture. You're like, oh, why don't we just do a scene that's just about sound? And someone comes in and lays that in. So it's really a mixture between just showing up for work and working as hard as you can, and then looking at it, and following your nose at the same time. The company has an internal logic that gets us through the show, and that internal logic is one that's kind of designed for us to orchestrate and give energy and focus in major and minor. That's his only purpose, actually. What I really enjoy about things like Missing and really enjoy about shows like Institute is that the audience's interpretation of images is usually far more interesting and has much more authorship than what we have. So we have, this, when you work on a piece for 2 years, you have to be in love with the idea to have that much to give it that much legs, but also it has to, you're carving it away and stripping it down to such universal values that it really is robust enough to be open to many, many different kinds of interpretations. And when people ask, what does this mean, as much as we'd like to help, as much as we'd like to maybe kind of give away that sense for us, it's just too much of a deflation for someone else's incredible experience that they might have had that's definitely their own. I think it's to do with the images and where we move and how we move. They're just flags and beats. And how we get from one place to another and what the energy is completely to do with what's just come before. How we want to turn up what's just happened because the last scene felt maybe a little bit flattened. And it's a little bit flat because someone decided in the middle of the show that they need a gentler beginning, they need a gentler way of opening the show. Everything affects everything else, so there's a real sense of real-time decision-making about how an image is going to be delivered. So I think in rehearsals, there's a feeling of enjoying the bare bones of it, enjoying the precision and counts and where things have to be on, off, so that when it comes to the show, that work is done, and then everything else is just colour, and everything else is you being able to have that extra part of your brain available to really see what the other people are doing and how they're doing it differently. And I think that really helps to allow certain images on a certain night to feel completely different, and things that we think are maybe really important in our internal logic are a little bit into minor. It just feels completely different every time if you allow yourself to be precise. The qualities that Gecko demands of its performers are an ability to have an explosive sense of emotionality with very, very high precision in physicality. That's one of the most difficult things that I've found in this company, to really open the floodgates emotionally with the range of things, but not letting that soften what you do physically. So those two things, I say, are the qualities that really pin down what we do. I find it incredibly hard to do, just because a lot of people come from a background that's stronger in one or the other, and it's just such a juggle, a conscious juggle, to find some sense of being truthful with your emotions without letting that be a choreographed set emotionality. But when the movement sensor has to be very you have to really drive the point in a very specific place to make the show move as an orchestra. So it's a constant gauging and turning up and down of different volumes, and I think that's about increasing your awareness of all of your faculties as a performer. I sing movement. Okay, so instead of going 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, you go because singing your way through it, engaging like your vocal, engaging a muscle to keep you in check, spreads straight away to the body. You start counting with your physicality. If you get a bit numerical, then I think not only does it become quite metered, everything, but your head's just somewhere else. And in a show like this, there's just not enough room and not enough time for you to be thinking about numbers. I think the whole kind of counting on eights thing is a very borrowed idea from music, and I think dance can be a bit of a... It's coming out of that phase, but dance has been a bit of a slave to music, and it takes a lot of its rules. And I think that dance is it's a very lyrical, can be very melodic, it can also be very percussive, and they don't follow the same rules of counts, and I don't think the body should either. Again, it's about, if you can imagine, if you can hear it and you can feel it, then you can dance it. I think that's what it is. Thrills are definitely being part of a show that is completely collaborative, and cooperation is completely at its heart. It's not just one of those things that you kind of say. It's a fundamental necessity of the show and the shows to work, and it's one of the most engaging things that I do in my life. The touring is amazing, and this show gives off an energy where when you come out to meet people afterwards, you really feel that energy come back. And when you're out in places like here in Mexico, for example, you meet people who really want to then give you something back and show you parts of their city that you wouldn't have found. It's a very giving relationship in the company and kind of on personal, on an audience level as well. That's definitely a thrill. A challenge is that it's, apart from being one of the hardest things I've done physically, and I've done a lot of hard things in the dance world, but this is the most stretched I've ever been of my abilities. And also just things like get-ins, the smallest changes of shape cause us so much changing and jiggling around. So on the plus side, it feels like we always do the show for the first time, and on the negative side, it's just a really, really a long-winded process trying to get this thing working technically. I think it's really important to find an element in the arts that you love the most and feel like your intention is to master it. Feel like you're going to master it, because once you start feeling like every day you've got this ambition where it's not just about getting a job, it's not about comparing and doing that, and it's not about escalating on a comparative sense, it's about you becoming a master at the thing you love. Because when you do that, suddenly the things next to it, say your thing is dance and you love it and you do it and you get to a level that's so much, it's very, it gives you something. You're getting a level of learning from it where it's really giving you something. To the left and right of you might be singing and music or acting. And suddenly once you master it, the principles really pour into the other things a lot more easily. What I mean by master it, I mean mastering it keeps it quite open. It's like something you just want to do, which is not the same as just going very, very narrow down one line, because I think I'm talking about the arts, and that's going to narrow you down in the arts. The more I look around these days, it's much more interdisciplinary, dancers becoming writers and people finding, singing, it's really ambitious, and I think people are looking for ambitious performers. And what gives me confidence and what makes me ambitious is that I've got one thing that I really hold on to as an anchor and let that teach everything else that I can possibly learn. So just don't compromise on your effort to master one thing that you love.